Terps and Hoosiers at 3:30 on CBS. The red-hot Fighting Signettis are 8-0 for a second straight season, and they're doing it pretty convincingly. They lead the FBS in points differential and have very much earned that number 2 ranking. Bud Elliott is still with us here on HQ Spotlight. And Bud, I think the country is pretty familiar with the number 2 Hoosiers, so let's start talking a little Terps. And my eyes go straight to that quarterback, Malik Washington. He's somebody who has been quietly playing really well in his true freshman season, so what can we expect from him Saturday?
Emily, this is a player that Maryland was so excited to hold on to on signing day. I know they did a great job of getting him in the fold and keeping him committed. And he has just played well beyond his years. Like, the physical talent is certainly there. We saw him when Cover 3 was out there at the Elite 11. Looked really good out there last summer. And he stepped in and played exceptionally well. Like the guy has a big-time arm. He seems to have a pretty good idea of where to go with the football. He has enough mobility. Like, he's not a runner, but he can run, some. And Maryland's offense has looked, pretty good overall with him at the helm. And he's had some freshman hiccups, but Maryland does not have a ton of talent around him, and he's played exceptionally well, I think, relative to Maryland's talent level and the schedule that they've seen so far.
Yeah, you mentioned that was a big win for Maryland to keep a hometown kid home. He was QB5 in the 2025 class this year, so we had high expectations for him, and he seems to be living up to it so far. But there's another true freshman that you've got your eye on, defensive lineman Sidney Stewart.
Yeah, like Maryland, some of their best players are true freshmen. Sidney Stewart, one of the best defensive linemen already in the Big Ten, a kid who has just sky-high potential, very productive so far, gives good effort on a down-to-down basis. He's got the quickness. He plays with a little bit of heaviness in his hands, which I think you got to love as well. And they've kind of turned him loose to get into the backfield, allowed him to really thrive with what he does here. You're seeing all the hits he's had on quarterback so far. And he's been a real disruptive presence now for the Terps. And it's exciting to watch, some of the young guys that Maryland has coming on. And we'll see if they can build upon that this offseason with more high school and more portal. But they have some nice building blocks there in College Park.
Yeah, he's got a tough task ahead of him, though, as well as the rest of the defense, because Indiana's offense was pretty spectacular last year, Bud. Even better this year. They're coming off a 50-point win over UCLA. They now average over 45 points per game, which is the most in a season in Indiana history. What is it about this year's offense that makes it even better than last?
Well, I think it's the quarterback position. So last year you had Curtis Rourke, a player who Indiana revealed at the end of the season actually had a torn ACL. He was playing on. He was like a nice older college quarterback. Mendoza is like a legitimate first-round prospect. So you return most of last year's offense. You have a dynamic receiving core there with Surratt and Cooper, who's a tremendous number 2, really, for any college team. And you insert the guy who has first-round quarterback talent, big-time arm, the ball's out exceptionally quick. I think it took a little bit of time for them to figure out exactly what he wanted to do as far as calling plays for his skill set. Signetti's comments on him in spring weren't super encouraging, but obviously in the fall things really seemed to click. He's one of the Heisman favorites, and I think a deserved one. And one of the things Indiana does so well, like, they just seem to get up for every game. They're truly a team that plays with a great chip on their shoulder. And a lot of teams, have let down spots and let down games. And I'm not saying that Indiana is immune from that, but so far under Sinetti, they really kind of are. They seem to just come out with the mindset, we're going to go kill these guys every single week. And for the most part, they do. And I don't really expect that much different this weekend.
You mentioned the mindset from Curt Cignetti. Famously, before their game against UCLA, he kept saying the Bruins, we're looking at them as a 3-0 team, because what happened at the beginning of the season, we don't care about that. Trying to create, like you said, that chip on their shoulder, make sure they take everybody seriously. So what's impressed you most about the way that Cignetti has coached his team in 2025, coming off a spectacular year by Indiana standards last year?
I think he kind of went into the season with the mindset of unfinished business, right? We did not reach the pinnacle. Certainly we had the best Indiana season last year, making the college ball playoff that they've had in my lifetime, or really probably anybody's lifetime watching this program right now. But I think the fact they look to build upon what they did last year. They rebounded a little bit in the transfer portal on the defensive side. And like, so far this year, they have a really nice pass rush, and they also have a nice blitz package where they seem to be great at figuring out pre-snap what your protection is, or not what it is, but what it's likely to be. And then they exploit that. They get so many free runners at the quarterback. Go back and watch that Oregon game. Yes, they had great pass rush. They had guys winning one-on-ones. But they also had quite a few just unblocked shots on Dante Moore that I think rattled that young quarterback for Oregon. So given that Maryland has not seen a decent pass rush so far this year, certainly not in the last month, that's going to be quite the challenge for a Terps team that probably doesn't have the best offensive line so far.
Yeah, it could be a tough afternoon for Malik Washington. But if we go back to the quarterback on the other side of things, you mentioned that Fernando Mendoza, in your eyes, is a worthy Heisman candidate. But as he projects to the next level, what could he be as an NFL quarterback?
Like maybe better than Cousins, I guess what would be an interesting comp. Like not a guy who's super mobile, but he's not like a total non-athlete. Super accurate. He does deliver the ball on time and in a really catchable, like, you know, his release is nice. It's a very catchable ball. It allows for a lot of yards after the catch. He doesn't really put it off target to where guys are having to, you know, slow their feet, get off balance in the catch. I think that's one of the underrated traits. Just such a catchable ball on time in rhythm. And yet he does have the arm to drive the ball to all parts of the field. So you got to play him honest.
We've talked about both of these quarterbacks. I hope I'm not going out on a limb here and saying that these are two NFL quarterbacks playing in this game. Obviously, we got to wait a little bit longer to see the guy on the Maryland side of things. But as you compare these two quarterbacks, what stands out?
So Malik is clearly more athletic and a little bit bigger of a build, I think, especially relative, you know, to their age. Mendoza's a couple years older, you know, than he is. But they're both guys who see it pretty well relative to their experience in college football. Like Malik is not just a see it, throw it guy, which so often freshman quarterbacks are. They have to wait until they see it open. He seems to have a nice knack for throwing with some anticipation. And granted, he's a freshman, it's not there all the time, but when he's playing well, you see it. He's like, okay, like 1, 2, 3 balls out on time. And when they give him good protection, he really thrives. Like this is a guy, there are so many nice young quarterbacks in the Big Ten this year. Obviously, you know, Malik, Bryce Underwood at Michigan, and a couple more young guys coming on. Obviously, Maeva at USC, who's, I guess, not quite so young anymore. But, I mean, this is a nice league of quarterbacks, and it kind of makes it difficult every week.
If you had to maybe roughly rank them, I guess, where would you put Malik Washington in the tier of Big Ten quarterbacks? You mentioned there's a lot of great talent and young talent.
Well, he's certainly top half, I would think. He's better than what Penn State has. I think he's roughly on par so far this year to what Michigan has with Underwood. I think he's played about as well, or maybe a little bit better, you know, than Childs. Probably not as good as Williams there at Washington. Not quite as good as Dante at Oregon or Maeva at USC. Not quite as good as Sayin. But I mean, there's 17 teams in the Big Ten. I think Iowa would take him. You know, Raiola, I think, has been better for him slightly at Nebraska. But you know, Minnesota would certainly take him. Northwestern, Penn State. There's UCLA, I think, would probably take him, although Nico's turned around a little bit after the firing of Coach Foster. So I think he's like solidly top half. And if you're at Maryland and you tell them, hey, guys, y'all are going to have a top half quarterback in the Big Ten who's a true freshman, they're taking that all day.
Yeah, they're taking it and they're hoping to keep him too. I don't want to put the cart before the horse there, but all those teams would like a piece of Malik Washington. Finally, the Terps started the season 4-0, have not won since. What is your game prediction for this one on CBS?
I do think that there's some chances it's a little bit lower scoring. Maryland does have a legit pass rush. You know, if you're Indiana, you need to keep the hammer down in order to get that playoff seeding, especially if you don't win the Big Ten. There's a legitimate shot here that if if Indiana runs the table and they were to lose to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, which I think will be a good game, by the way. I don't think that's setting up for a massive blowout. But if they were to play Ohio State close in that Big Ten championship game, and if they enter that game at 12-0, I think Indiana is legitimately looking at a potential bye in the playoff, which is huge to be able to get to that second round. So I do think Indiana probably keeps the hammer down. I would expect a good defensive game out of them, given the offensive line struggle so far with the University of Maryland.
And there's a very good chance 2 Big Ten teams end up with a bye. Bud Elliott, thank you so much for breaking down the CBS Game of the Week. It is big time on CBS. Number 2, Indiana at Maryland. You can catch the action at 3:30 on Saturday. Watch it on CBS or stream on Paramount+. And for all things college football, check out the CBS Sports College Football YouTube channel. You've got game previews, analysis, live podcasts. Subscribe to that channel by using the QR code on your screen.